Hey there. So, for this week's episode, I am coming to you solo. And here's really the reason. We are talking about honestly, let's be real. All of the topics that we try to talk about on the Small Town Big Talk show are not small issues. If they were, we'd call it a small talk show. But the main reason that I decided to come on as a solo for this particular topic is because I really felt it was important to get a variety of opinions from people. And also, I didn't want to get too entrenched in just one person and another person's perspective on this particular thing. It's just a nuanced, kind of challenging, kind of sticky topic. And so we're going to talk for a few minutes here about sexism in small towns. So before I go any further, I guess I'm going to share with you kind of my perspective on this and the fact that I'm actually not a feminist at heart. That might make some people upset. I guess I don't really care. I really love men. And I think men and women both have roles to play. I think that each gender lends themselves to skills that are, we were designed and created to do certain things that the other gender isn't as naturally qualified and gifted to do. Now, please also note that doesn't mean that I don't think that there's still some opportunities for us, especially in small towns, to help better integrate women's skill sets into government, into some of the power positions in terms of the committees and the groups that are formed in small towns. This is just something that I have worked in several male-dominated industries, one of them being finance, and I have heard the phrase, I've used the phrase. My husband just said it to me the other day about a particular group in our community, the phrase the good old boys club or the good old boys network. And so I actually, in order to prep for this episode, I took to both my social media, just general pages, as well as my close Facebook group called the Groove Seekers Community. So if you're watching this and you're a woman and you're like, ooh, this is a good topic, I'd like to dig in, and you're not part of that group, please join us. We have all sorts of deep and good conversations, and the biggest thing with that group is that we always want everybody to feel like they're not alone, and that you're not as crazy as you sometimes feel like you are, because that's a real thing. So I actually did take to that personal close group to ask them some questions about if this is a thing for them. You know, I basically said, have you experienced this? Does this feel like it's a thing in your community? And if so, what ideas or tips would you have to share with other people to try and kind of work through it? And so I want to share with you some of what came out of those conversations, some of what I've been getting from people just in private messages about this. And then, of course, I'll throw some of my own thoughts in there. But ultimately, I just want to start a dialogue about the role that women play. So it's not so much about sexism. I use kind of a sexy and sensational title to get you to peek into this. But really, I want to talk about women and the role that we play in building community, progressing communities forward, and really the roles that we play in politics, in government, in everything in a small town, because our role really is important. And I work predominantly with women. And so this is important to me as a woman. And I'm also raising a daughter, which, again, those things really matter. So here are some of the things. I did make a few notes so we can talk through this. Here are some of the ways that sexism, I think, creeps in, or it can feel like sexism. And maybe that's how I'll frame this up going forward, where it feels a little bit like, ugh, are you doing this to me just because I'm a girl, right? Like just because I'm a woman. So one of the things is that how it shows up, or kind of maybe reasons why. One, for a lot of women in the Groove Seekers community, came back and talked about the fact that small towns often have a skewed older demographic, meaning we've got all the generations from veterans down to Gen Z now, right? And everything in between. But we still have a fairly large population of that veteran group of people. And that group of people, so it creates kind of two things. One, they, by the very way that they move through the world, think of everything that they've lived through, have very set ideas and opinions often about the role that women should play. Okay, so I'm fifth generation farmer. I've talked about this before. You know, what my grandmother did on the farm and what I do on the farm today or with the farm, it's just like the difference is almost night and day. And what she did, it was great for her. But there's a lot of people that are her age that are still alive. She's gone now. But and then you know all the other farm wives that grew up from this earlier generation are still alive now. And of course they have strong feelings about where we ought to be. And maybe it's in the kitchen, maybe it's making meals, maybe it's delivering those meals to the fields, things like that. That is the way that they grew up. So they have every right for their experience to shape the way they view the world just as we do. But that's one of the reasons I think sometimes small towns feel maybe a little stuck in this sense. It's the traditions of what they've experienced, that traditional upbringing that they're holding tight to and maybe aren't as willing to let go of. So it can be hard when you're coming into that kind of an environment. The second thing is that there are a lot of male-dominated fields and or industries in very small towns, primarily if we're talking agriculture. Again, this was the fascinating thing. There were 3 women that came and kind of told their stories in the Groove Seekers community on Facebook about how they're often mistaken for the secretary. One is in grain merchandising. She was sharing her story about being a grain merchandiser, and she's a female. And so that means she's running grain, marketing grain, helping farmers market their grain in a rural setting. I don't know how many elevators she works at. I have no idea. But she was talking about the fact that like a guy will come in and say, you know, hey, can you cut a check for this or that? And she'll smile and say, well, I'll make sure the bookkeeper does that. And then he kind of does a double take like, wait, you're not the secretary or you're not the bookkeeper. And so I think, again, it's really important to recognize that just because there's maybe less percentage of women doing those jobs, it's not necessarily sexism. The reason they're responding like that isn't necessarily sexism. It actually is potentially just that they're genuinely surprised. Okay. Now I've had some women report that the response that they've gotten at times isn't always favorable, and that's just poor manners and lack of tact, which is not, men don't get to own that exclusively. I know plenty of women that are lacking it too. And then like the third thing that I wanted to bring forward from my perspective is that we have very few women in my little town right now, we have no women in government positions. But by government positions, I mean elected positions. To my knowledge, and again, go ahead and fact check me, friends in my community here, but I actually looked back. I went to City Hall one day to pick up we have gymnastics there, and I went to pick up my son, and I was looking at the wall. They have the wall of all of the past mayors in our small town. I don't believe there's ever been a female mayor in the history of my community. I actually did a little digging. The first mayor to ever be elected to a community in North Dakota happened in 1982. I was alive in 1982. I mean, that's not that long ago. I'm not a super young buck anymore, but come on. It just seems like, wow, that's taken a long time. Also, it has been at least 1 decade, and I would venture to say probably closer to 2, since we have even had a female that sits on our city council. Another female that is actually was at the time when we were having this conversation. She was a government employee. She was our auditor. And we were talking about the fact that there was more female representation on our city council in the 50s than there is now. Now, it's something just to note, right? And I am not going to say, we're gonna get to this, just some ideas about what we can do. Is it that we're being, as women, are we being looked over? Are we being ignored? Are we being treated that we have no value? Are we being treated as though we can't contribute? Or are we not raising our hand? Are we not stepping into the ring? Because we can't have it both ways, right? We can't say that we feel excluded from the conversation if we're not putting ourselves in the way to have the conversation or to be asked. You can't win an election you never run for, that kind of a thing. So, I don't have the answers here. I just think it's definitely a conversation I wanted to bring up because I've heard on more than one occasion, like, oh, it's just such a good old boys club. And then I just sit here and I think to myself, is that what's really going on? Or is there something else happening? So before we move on to a few ideas, because there was some good feedback that I got from the ladies in the group, there was kind of two other things that came out that I thought were really worth talking about, because again, we can't fix everything. But by engaging in honest discussions about things, we can start to make ripples, and those ripples have a lasting, they ripple out. That's the whole point of a ripple, right? Like there's things, it's movement. And I think these kinds of conversations are the things that cause those little ripples. And I want to make some ripples. I want to even make some waves, if I'm being honest. Okay. One of the women, well, a couple of the women actually talked about, are we perpetuating these kind of sexist ideas amongst ourselves? So one particular woman commented that she said, I was trying to plan a ladies' egg event. And she said, and you just wouldn't believe the women that say things like, well, I don't think we should have, we shouldn't have dinner at this meal because who's going to cook for my husband? Almost in a way, and again, she can have that opinion. The gal that was coordinating was like, I was just so shocked. Like, yeah, you can have that opinion. If you want to be home and cook for your husband every night, that's fine. But then to kind of almost lay it into the conversation as though it's shameful if the rest of us don't. So some of it, I think, is not only generationally that there's these ideas that are hard to change. I think sometimes it's cultural. And in this case, maybe, I mean, again, like if you have very traditional outlooks about what your role as a wife and a mom should be, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. All I'm asking is for us to consider, are we being open-minded enough in the way that we're dialoguing about these things with each other so that we're not shaming each other for things that aren't actually shameful? It's just a different way to look at the same situation. Like another gal commented, and this was really funny. It made me smile, but it's not funny. Just like anytime you're asked to do something in a small town, it's like, moms, can you bring bars? And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Actually, you shouldn't want my bars because I don't really make that great of bars. I'm really good at lots of things, but bar making isn't really one of them. And so it's that idea that like, how do we change that? How do we change that? How do we get our contributions seen and valued and appreciated? Okay, so I just thought some of those things were worth mentioning because it's like I've absolutely seen that and heard that in my own small town. So here's the whole thing. How do we become a bridge? How do we become a bridge between what we think the future should be and where we're at right now without demoralizing and demeaning and criticizing everything that's come before? Because that's where these people, like the ones that we feel, the old guard, the resistant ones, the good old boys club, whatever the heck we want to call this kind of mentality that sometimes we want to label as stuck or rigid or, unbending, whatever. We put all sorts of labels on that type of person, right? They are proud of what they've built. And so when we come in and we come in hot, this is the whole thing. You come in, you're like, we're going to change everything. We're going to be radical. It's going to be amazing. They feel as though we're not acknowledging or honoring what they've done. They have a right to feel that way. So how do we become that bridge? How do we create more inclusivity in our community? And so I'm going to just say it. This isn't just about gender. This isn't just about men and women and how we show up and what we can contribute. This is about including all sorts of people. Different religions, different perspectives, different cultures, all of that in a small town. I think we all could learn how to be a little bit more inclusive. So here's the first thing. Kind of going back to, I've got four things. Going back to that idea of, are we perpetuating these problems by the way we speak to and about each other? Pay attention to the way you speak about the roles in your own community. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I am notorious for saying things like, I suck at creating systems. Like I have a business and I have these great group of women that I get to talk to and work with, and they're a mastermind group. And I notoriously say out loud, like, I suck at creating systems. I suck at it. I don't like it. I like carry on and I kind of whine about it. Systems are important, right? Like getting processes down. And when I say I suck at it, what I really mean is that it kind of drains my energy. But I have absolutely told myself the story that I'm not good at creating processes or having systems. One of my friends in there reminded me, we were on Voxer, and she said, I just want to, you have 3 children and you run a business from your home and you support your husband's business from home and you have a very full and busy life. She's like, you're project managing the crap out of your life. And I kind of started laughing because, of course, it's like I only think about certain skill sets in a very narrow perspective. And so the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I think it's really easy for us to overlook or undervalue the natural skills that we as women have to give. And we think about them only in the context of like, maybe it is city government, right? Like, well, I don't know anything about city planning, or I don't know anything about, I don't know, tax, anything related to taxes, or how to get the most out of city assessments, or what, any of the things, like any of those things that you think, I don't know how to do that. That doesn't mean you're not capable. Think of all the things in motherhood. Here's the throw out to all of you ladies that are moms, especially. Did you know what you were doing when you got your infant home? I sure as hell didn't. I had no idea. And I remember being like, you should not let me take this child home. Like, I'm not capable. I'm not equipped. And yet you figure it out. The same thing will happen with these things in the community that you want to learn how to do. We need to pay attention to the way that we're speaking about ourselves and the things that we do, because women, us, we are community builders. We are largely the ones that keep things moving, especially in agricultural communities. I mean, the men go to the field. Like, again, not just the men, women do it too. But I'm just saying, suddenly, the boards and the committees and the men are doing their thing, and the community still has to go on. Everything still moves forward, and it's women that a lot of times step in to fill that gap. And we are just way, way, way minimizing the value that we bring. So I'm just going to say, if you've ever caught yourself saying, like, I'm not really good at that, think of some area in your life where you probably have demonstrated that skill, and maybe own some of that instead of minimizing it like it's not important. Okay? So right off the bat, you know how to figure things out. You're more resourceful than you think, and you're a project manager. If you have a family and if you have a busy lifestyle of any kind, you are already good at those two things. Yay, skills that you can use. The second thing is raising your hand. In the Growth Seekers community, when I asked this question, and we're talking about male-dominated kind of industries, so agriculture being one. This grain merchandiser shared her story. Another one used to work in the butcher, like the meat industry. She worked at a butcher shop with her dad. Serious male, like all men do these things, like predominantly. And what they said, like unequivocally, was, raise your hand and say, I can add value here. Like, if you know that you have the skill set, say, yep, look at me, pick me. Raising your hand for public office, things like that. What these women talked about, two of them used this exact example, actually three of them, that if you want to be taken seriously as a woman in a male-dominated field or industry or group, you've got to know your shit. And that doesn't mean you have to come in and pretend to know your shit. You just have to learn, and then if you don't know, be honest about it. But other than that, be confident and know your shit. And I had to just share that because like three of them said that ultimately, even if men initially are like, oh, I have to work with you, isn't there a man I can talk to, that kind of a thing. If you know what you're talking about, you don't have to get defensive. You can look at them and say, I can help you with that. And then persist and help them, prove to them you know your shit, and then you're good. It's fine. And just don't ever lie about it, right? Don't ever conflate your skill set, because that doesn't ever work for anybody. So when there's something available that you know you can contribute, raise your hand and say, I can help with that. And then prove that to people. We all have skills that we can share. So we need to start raising our hands to get involved. Okay, and on that same note, the third idea is ask to be a guest or visit one of these meetings or committees or boards that maybe you want to get involved with. Learn about, so this is like the stepping stone to knowing your shit, is learning. Because nobody comes in knowing all of it. That's not how this works at all. And if you're in a situation where you feel like you're literally not given a chance because you're a woman, that's blatant sexism. But I don't actually think that's what most of us experience in our small towns. It's not that insidious. It's not that intentional. Some of it is just helping people see that the ingrained way that we do things is just the way it's always been done. And that can be broken, but it takes a lot of intentional effort on our part. We don't get to change and, do anything really about how other people handle it. So ask to be invited. Go visit one of these meetings and learn. Become a student of the situation. Become curious. Ask a ton of questions. Take individual board members to lunch. Ask them about their perspective. Ask them what they like to look for in prospective board members. And that's also at the same time saying, hey, I might be interested. I want to know what I can do to get the skill set that I would need to be considered an applicant or a candidate for whatever it is. Okay. And then the fourth thing is, I kind of said this at the very beginning, is trying to meet in the middle. This is the challenging thing about progress versus stagnation, and not just in small towns, but kind of everywhere, is this idea that the ones that are holding tight to the way they've always done it are stodgy, stoic, rigid, unbending, unfeeling, lacking inspiration, lacking innovation. They're the ones killing us, right? It's so easy to get in the mentality of the us versus them. What we really need to try to do is meet somewhere in the middle. Acknowledge this perspective over here before you come at them hard with how your new idea is so awesome, because they're never going to see it. They're never going to see it if we don't take the time to understand where they're coming from, try to get a sense of what got them to where they are, and you still might see things differently, but there will be a whole different level of respect. In a previous episode with Marlene, we talked about a gal that I was working with in a community I'm going to be speaking in here. She asked me the question, how do we activate other people? Such a great question, right? Ultimately, we activate other people by truly getting to know other people. Because once we know other people, we understand where they're coming from. We understand their view and their worldview, their perspective, their paradigm. All of those things matter. Like, two people that are running for office, let's say in your small town, if you're one that's never lived there, but you moved back and you served in the exact same capacity in another town, so you think you're so qualified, and you're up running against somebody that's never held a position but is a lifelong resident of the community that you're talking about, two completely different perspectives. And you might, the person that says, I have the skill set, I've done this before, I know I can do it, they may feel totally validated that they're a better choice. But realistically, there's a whole lot of history and tradition and experience that they don't understand and they don't know because they weren't here. So that's the thing. We need to get over ourselves, stop always trying to push agendas, and stand back and ask questions. Lots and lots and lots of questions. Come at it from a place of learning first. Because no matter what, in a small town, if we want to be successful, we've got to figure out how to work with other people. Small towns, everything happens with way more than one set of hands. It's all hands on deck for most things, especially if they're big, if they're going to get pushed forward. And building coalitions, building collaborations, being a team player all the way around requires us to meet in the middle. So, based on what I feel like I've heard from the women that I talk to and just my own perspective, I think it's unfair to label the behavior that we're seeing just as blatant sexism. I do sometimes think people don't know what they don't know. And I'm not saying that then that we shy away from the conversation or that we don't address the things that we see that maybe feel a little sexist. But we first have to take a step back and try to understand where they're coming from. And we have to monitor our own behavior, the way we talk about ourselves, the way we talk about each other. Women are worse to each other than men have likely ever been to us. I mean, seriously, I shouldn't be just so blatant about that. I mean, men can be horrible to us too. I get it. But when it comes to who's doing more damage, I think the way we talk to each other and the way we talk about each other and the way we don't honor the value that we're bringing, we can do this together. We as women can do this to step up and make a huge difference in our communities. So as always, friends, I would love to get your feedback on this. I want to know what you think. I want to know what you've experienced. And together, as always, we are better together. We can make our small towns more inclusive, not just of women, but of all people. Have a great day, you guys. Don't forget, let me know what you think. And also, get your small town survival kit. I'm going to share a little video here. If you feel like you've struggled with some of these things, it's meant for you. Okay, have a great day, guys.